This is a long one, so buckle up. As you may or may not have heard or been following the real estate news, the National Association of Realtors has settled a $1.8 billion case. The case pertains to commissions paid through real estate transactions. Hi, I'm Shemeika Fox, your Santa Cruz real estate expert and your personalized real estate concierge. Starting August 17th, 2024, the real estate industry will begin adhering to new laws concerning commissions. These laws involve the Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement, or BRBC, and notably, they permanently eliminate commissions offered by the listing agent in both the MLS and listing agreements. So what does this mean for you, and how will it affect both real estate buyers and real estate sellers alike? Starting August 17th, 2024, buyers will need to sign a document called the Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement, BRBC, before they can view homes. Previously, buyers could contact a realtor to view any home or seek recommendations without any formal written agreement about agency, fiduciary duty, or compensation. Traditionally, buyers and their agents relied on the listing agent to compensate the buyer's agent at the close of escrow based on a prior agreement with the seller, which was then published on the MLS. While this was the standard practice, of course, variations always existed. Before touring properties, it will be essential to meet with the broker you are considering for representation to discuss the terms of the Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement. One important term in this document is the requirement for personal and financial information within 5 calendar days from the execution of this agreement. Buyer shall provide relevant and personal financial information, including, but not limited to, proof of funds and a pre-approval pre-qualification letter to broker to assure buyer's ability to acquire property. If the buyer fails to provide the information or does not qualify financially, the broker may cancel the agreement in writing. This is a new standard of practice and was not previously done. It's crucial to communicate this information with the lender, who will approve the buyer based on their ability to pay the down payment and their closing costs. This amount should be calculated considering a worst-case scenario. If the seller or listing agent covers some or all of the buyer broker compensation, the cash required to close will be reduced accordingly. Make sure that you communicate effectively with your lender as well with regards to this. These new regulations will require more paperwork to achieve what we were doing before. However, I believe the BRBC requirement will help professionalize our industry. It will ensure that realtors provide the value buyers expect, as they may need to pay out of pocket. Think of this relationship as similar to an attorney-client relationship. The buyer shops for the right realtor, chooses one, and is willing and able to pay their agent to secure their home and guide them through the entire buying process. Sounds very professional to me. What concerns me is that we live in an already very expensive area where home prices are nearly out of reach for many. So will this new law push people who are barely able to afford a home out of the market altogether? Could we potentially lose our middle class in this process? I don't know what's going to happen, but that is a concern that I have had for a while. The affordability factor. To be clear, it is still possible for the seller or listing agent to pay the buyer's agent their compensation. However, this now needs to be negotiated when presenting your offer. There's a section in the residential purchase agreement on page 2 under G318 which states, seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement, which is the SPBB, which is attached, or seller's broker's offer, if any, to compensate buyer's broker is unaffected unless otherwise agreed. Lots of paperwork. This takes us to the SPBB, or seller payment to buyer broker document. This document spells out exactly who is paying what to the buyer's broker. Remember, the listing agreement is the document that is used to negotiate the terms and commission paid for from the seller to the listing agent. So now this is another form that we're going to apply. Have I bored you or confused you yet? Okay, good. Now let's move on. As realtors, we are bound by a code of ethics. We are not allowed to steer clients away from specific properties based on protected classes or the amount in which the realtor will be paid, etc. Under the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, steering buyers based on the amount of broker compensation is prohibited. Realtors must pledge themselves to protect and promote the interest of their client, putting their client's best interests before their own. A realtor must never put broker compensation before their client's interests. Realtors must be honest and truthful in their real estate communications and must not exaggerate, misrepresent, or conceal pertinent facts relating to the transaction, including facts about broker commissions. If a realtor does anything to put their own or another broker's compensation before her client's interests, they are violating that primary code of ethics and potentially violating the broker's fiduciary duties in their client, depending on the buyer-broker relationship and state law. In the agreement, NAR reaffirms its commitment to requiring that MLS participants must not limit the listings their client sees because of broker compensation. Written buyer agreements required by the National Association of Realtor practice changes that will be implemented on August 17th will also outline the MLS participants may not receive compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the agreement with the buyer. Since a broker working with a buyer cannot receive more compensation than the buyer has agreed to in that agreement, the amount of any offer of compensation is irrelevant to the buyer broker's compensation under these practice changes. NAR has eliminated any theoretical steering because a broker will not make more compensation by steering a buyer to a particular listing because it has a higher offer of compensation. Realtors must provide this information to potential buyers under NAR's Code of Ethics. Written buyer agreements required by the NAR practice changes that will be implemented on August 17th will also outline that MLS participants may not receive compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the agreement with the buyer. The NAR settlement also requires that to the extent that such a realtor or participant will receive compensation from any source, the agreement must specify and conspicuously disclose the amount or rate of compensation it will receive or how this amount will be determined. So, I ask you, if there are two properties that are alike and we present them both to the buyer, disclosing that one property seller will cover the buyer's broker compensation and the other property owner will not, which property do you assume the buyer will gain more interest in pursuing? I would agree, the property in which the seller will make the buyer's closing costs more attractive and more affordable. This settlement allows compensation to remain a choice for consumers when buying or selling a home. NAR continues to believe that offers of compensation help make professional representation more accessible, decrease costs for home buyers to secure these services, increase fair housing opportunities, and increase the potential buyer pool for sellers. The settlement does not change the ethical duties that NAR members owe their clients. Now included in the residential listing agreement is the broker compensation advisory under item 1B. The following is stated: offering compensation to a buyer's broker is negotiable. Sellers and sellers' brokers are not required by law or otherwise to offer compensation to buyer's brokers. The promise of payment for from the seller's broker to the buyer's broker may lead to a quicker or more efficient transaction because, one, knowing the overall cost of broker compensation at the time of the listing allows the seller to more easily calculate the seller's net proceeds when evaluating offers and counteroffers. And two, the seller's property may become more attractive to buyers who need a loan to finance the purchase price, since buyer's broker's compensation would be paid from the seller's proceeds at the time of closing rather than out of pocket by the buyer, who may have limited funds. Many buyers have limited funds after paying a deposit, a down payment, property inspection costs, and other costs for closings. These buyers may be more likely to write an offer for the seller's property if they are able to effectively finance the buyer broker compensation into the cost of their loan rather than coming up with additional funds. By making the seller's property attractive to all buyers, regardless of their ability to directly pay a buyer's broker, the proof of prospective buyers for the seller's property will likely increase. 3, offering compensation to buyers' brokers allows the seller to inform brokers representing prospective buyers they can rely on the efficient payment of their compensation without adding to buyers' closing costs. An offer of compensation from the seller's broker to the buyer's broker is optional. A seller may instruct the seller's broker to offer no such compensation in the listing agreement or amendment. The seller instructs the seller's broker whether to offer any compensation to the buyer's broker, and if so, how much. Well, now you have heard it. These new changes have started and will soon as August 17th be enforced. I know that was a lot to take in. It was a lot for me too. I've been reading these forms over and over for the last few weeks. If you would like additional information or to do a deeper dive into these new real estate practices and better understand how these new laws will affect you as both a real estate buyer or a seller, please reach out to me. I'm Shemeika Fox, your Santa Cruz real estate expert and your personalized real estate concierge.